Step back in time to Edo, Japan, 1750. In the heart of the city lies a place known to all but spoken of in whispers, Yoshiwara, the floating world. A district shimmering with silk and lanterns, filled with music and poetry. From the outside, it was a vision of beauty. Elegant women in elaborate kimonos, their faces painted masterpieces peeking from behind delicate fans. But behind the silk screens and paper walls, a different story unfolds. A story of women who had no choice, sold by their families and treated as property. This isn't the story of the pleasure quarter as men saw it. This is the story of the mothers, the women who became pregnant in a place where motherhood was forbidden, facing impossible choices. Their pain has been largely erased from history, but tonight we tell their story. The story of mothers behind the silk walls. In Yoshiwara, the rules were strict. The women, known as Yuran or Yujo, depending on their rank, were courtesans, entertainers, and companions to wealthy men. They wore the finest silks and learned the arts of poetry, music, and conversation. They were treated like precious objects, beautiful and valuable, but not human and certainly not free. Most of these women didn't choose this life. They were sold by poor farming families who couldn't feed their children. A father would receive a pouch of money. A daughter would simply disappear. Some arrived as young as 7 or 8 years old. They began as attendants, learning the ways of the quarter. By their teenage years, their true work would begin. A contract was typically for 10 years, a decade of service to pay off the debt their family incurred. But this debt rarely decreased. There were constant charges for food, kimonos, makeup, and hair ornaments. After 10 years, most women owed more than when they started, and so they stayed. Year after year, decade after decade. Some would live and die within those walls, never knowing freedom again. This was the gilded cage of Yoshiwara, and tonight we'll explore the impossible choices these women made when faced with the one thing the quarter would not allow, a child of their own. Ever heard of Yoshiwara, the famous pleasure district of old Japan? It wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a fortress. High walls surrounded it, with just one gate in and one gate out, always guarded. For the women inside, leaving was nearly impossible. They were prisoners in a gilded cage. Their homes were called haremis, and during the day they would sit behind wooden bars, displayed like objects in a shop window for men to browse and choose. Life was a strict, relentless routine. They'd wake late, having worked all night, and eat a simple meal of rice and vegetables. Then the long process of transformation began. A high-ranking courtesan, an oyen, might spend 3 hours just on her hair. The elaborate Shimada hairstyle was a work of art, needing several attendants and countless pins. Next came the white makeup, a mask made from lead-based powder. It covered their face and neck, but it was a slow poison, damaging their skin and health over time. Then came the kimono. Not just one, but layer upon layer of heavy silk. An orin's robes could weigh over 20 pounds. The wide belt, the obi, was tied in the front, not the back, like respectable women wore. This was a clear sign of their profession, but also a practical one, making it easier to untie. Every single detail of their appearance was designed to attract men, but none of it was for their own comfort or dignity. At night, the lanterns would glow, and the streets of Yoshiwara would come alive with men from all walks of life, merchants, samurai artists all, seeking an escape from their daily lives. The women would greet them with flawless etiquette, pouring sake, playing music, and laughing at jokes. They had to pretend to be interested, to be happy. Then, when the night's entertainment was over, they performed the duties they were sold for. But the house owners lived in constant fear of one thing: pregnancy. A pregnant woman couldn't work. She was a financial loss and a moral complication in this floating world that was supposed to be free of real-world consequences like family and children. But despite their efforts to prevent it, the inevitable happened. Women got pregnant, and the harsh reality of their existence became even more complicated. The stark reminder of the hidden stories behind the beautiful facade. Thanks for watching, and if you found this history compelling, please consider subscribing for more stories like this. In the shadowy world of Yoshiwara, women held secrets, desperate remedies passed down in whispers. They tried to control their own bodies, drinking bitter teas made from roots and plants, hoping to prevent a life from taking root. Some worked, many did not. There were other methods too, physical tricks shared between them, but nothing was ever a guarantee. When a woman realized she was pregnant, a terrifying choice loomed. Should she tell the house owner, or should she hide it? Telling them immediately usually meant one thing: being forced to drink a stronger, more dangerous concoction. A poison designed to end the pregnancy quickly. These were perilous. Some women survived and returned to work, but others fell gravely ill, and a few never recovered. For the house owners, it was the preferred solution: fast, efficient, and it kept the secret behind closed doors. But some women chose defiance. They would bind their bellies tightly, wear looser robes, and feign sickness to avoid certain clients. They'd confide in a trusted friend, another woman who understood the risks, someone who would help conceal the growing truth. This deception, however, had a time limit. Eventually, the secret would reveal itself, and the consequences were severe. Discovering a pregnancy late enraged the house owner. It wasn't about morality, it was about money. Every day a woman couldn't work was a loss of income, adding more time to her already insurmountable debt. The punishment for this deception was brutal. Some women were beaten. Others were locked away in tiny back rooms, barely fed, left to endure their pregnancy in complete isolation. The message was clear: you have failed, you are worthless, and you are being punished. And when the child was finally born, the rule was absolute and heart-wrenching. The baby would be taken away. In Yoshiwara, mothers and their children were never allowed to stay together. That was the cruel, unbreakable law of the floating world. There was a woman named Sakura. That wasn't her real name, of course. Real names were left behind when women entered Yoshiwara, replaced with new ones. Flower names, season names, beautiful names that had nothing to do with who they really were. Sakura means cherry blossom, a common name for courtesans. This Sakura was 17 when she realized she was pregnant. She had been in Yoshiwara for 9 long years. She was sold by her father when she was only 8. He was a poor farmer with 3 daughters and no sons. After the rice harvest failed 2 years in a row, he had to make a choice. Sakura was the middle daughter, not the oldest, who helped her mother in the house, not the youngest, who was still just a baby. Sakura was the one they could spare. A man came to their village, promising she would work as a servant in a grand house in Edo. Her father took the money, and Sakura left with the man, never to see her family again. For 9 years, she did what she had to do to survive. She learned to paint her face into a perfect mask. She learned to move with grace in robes that felt as heavy as stone. She learned to play the shamisen just well enough to accompany her own songs. She learned to tell which customers were cruel and which were just sad and lonely. Most importantly, she learned to separate her mind from her body, to float away to a place where no one could touch her. She learned to cry silently into her pillow at night so no one would hear. And she learned that hope was the most dangerous thing of all. But then she became pregnant. She knew the exact moment it happened. She couldn't explain how. She just knew. A certain customer, a certain night. Something inside her had shifted. At first, she tried to hide it, telling no one. She drank the bitter teas the older women had taught her about, but this time they didn't work. The weeks ticked by. Her monthly bleeding never came. Then she felt the first subtle changes, a tenderness in her breasts, a new heaviness in her belly, a strange and powerful awareness of her own body. So Sakura made a decision. She would hide it. She would hide it for as long as she possibly could. It wasn't because she dreamed of keeping the baby. She knew that was impossible. No, it was because every extra day was another day she didn't have to face what would come next. Every extra day was a day she could pretend, just for a moment, that maybe, somehow, things could be different, even though, deep in her heart, she knew they wouldn't be. Sakura began to bind her belly, using long strips of cotton cloth she kept hidden under her sleeping mat. Every morning, before anyone else was awake, she'd wrap the cloth tightly around her middle. At first, it was just uncomfortable, but as the weeks passed, it became painful. Still, it did the job, concealing the growing curve of her stomach beneath the many layers of her kimono. She confided in only one person, her friend Yuki. Yuki was older, maybe 25, and had been in Yoshiwara since she was just 10 years old. She had seen and survived it all. So when Sakura whispered her secret one night, Yuki wasn't surprised. She simply nodded. "How far along?" she asked quietly. Sakura shook her head. 2 months, maybe 3. After a long silence, Yuki said, "You should tell the mistress now. It will only be worse if you wait." But Sakura couldn't bring herself to do it. "Just a little longer," she whispered. Yuki sighed. "I will help you. But you must understand, this cannot end well. There is no good ending to this story." Sakura knew. Of course, she knew. But she still couldn't say the words that would trigger the terrible consequences. So, she continued to hide, and Yuki helped her. Yuki told the house mistress that Sakura had a stomach illness, convincing her to only assign Sakura to specific customers, those who preferred conversation over physical exertion. The mistress grumbled, but as long as the money kept coming in, she agreed. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Sakura was now 4 months pregnant, nearly halfway there. And still, besides Yuki, no one knew. But secrets in Yoshiwara were like cherry blossoms in a storm. They never lasted forever. The walls had ears, and the women watched each other constantly, sometimes out of care, sometimes jealousy, sometimes just sheer boredom. One evening, as Sakura was getting ready for bed, another courtesan, Hana, saw her unwrapping the binding cloth. She saw the undeniable curve of Sakura's belly. Their eyes locked. Sakura froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Hana's expression was impossible to read. Then, without a single word, Hana turned and walked away. Sakura knew what was coming. Hana would tell, and everything was about to change. The next morning came far too quickly. I hadn't slept a wink, just lay there on my thin futon staring at the ceiling, waiting for that inevitable knock on the door. It came just after dawn, sharp and cold, like the voice that followed. "Sakura, come with me." Now, it was the house mistress, Yuki, who slept in the same room, gave my hand a brief, tight squeeze before I had to get up. What could she say? There were no words that could help now. I followed the mistress down the narrow, dark corridor to a small room at the very back of the house. It was a dusty place, used for storage and, more often, for private, unpleasant conversations. She slid the door shut behind us, the sound echoing in the silence, and turned to face me. "Show me," she commanded. Her voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. My hands trembled as I loosened my outer robe. The thick binding cloth was wrapped tightly around my middle. "Remove that as well," she said, her voice even quieter this time. As the cloth fell away, a silent gasp escaped my lips. There was no hiding it anymore. The soft curve of my belly was clear in the dim light. For months, 4 months of a tiny life growing inside me, the mistress stared, her expression a chilling mix of fury and resignation. "How long have you been hiding this?" My voice was barely a whisper. "For months, mistress." She squeezed her eyes shut and took a long, deep breath, struggling to control her anger. "You foolish, foolish girl," she finally said, her voice tight with frustration. "Do you have any idea the position this puts us all in? For months of deception." She began to pace back and forth, her contained rage filling the small room, making it feel even smaller, suffocating. "I could send you away right now, cast you out onto the street. But," she paused, her sharp gaze locking onto mine, "that would mean losing everything you still owe this house." And that was it. She was a businesswoman, first and foremost. I still had my debt, a massive, crushing debt that seemed to grow larger every single year, no matter how hard I worked. Sending me away would mean losing her investment forever. So, she wouldn't do that. No, the mistress would find another solution, a practical one. She would hide me away, isolate me from everyone until the time came. Then, she would take the child, and as soon as I was able, she would put me right back to work. It was the only option that made business sense. My heart shattered into a million pieces, knowing my baby's fate was already sealed. The mistress made her decision quickly. "You will stay in this room until the child is born. You will not be permitted to work. You will not speak to the other women without permission. You will receive basic meals and nothing more. When the baby comes, arrangements will be made for its care elsewhere, and then you will return to your duties. The time you lose will be added to your contract. Do you understand?" Sakura bowed her head. "Yes, mistress." There was nothing else to say, no argument to make, no mercy to beg for. She had known this would happen. She had always known. The mistress left, locking the door behind her, the sound of the key turning echoing with finality. Sakura was alone in the small, quiet room. There was a single window, set high up on the wall, letting in just a sliver of the outside world. A thin futon lay on the floor, beside it a small table. Nothing else. The emptiness of the room mirrored the emptiness she felt inside. Days began to blur into a monotonous cycle. Twice a day, a tray of food would appear through the door. Rice, pickled vegetables, weak tea. It was simple, but enough to sustain her and the new life growing within her. No one spoke to her during these silent deliveries. She was isolated, set apart from everyone else, as if she had become invisible to the world, a ghost in her own life. But Yuki did not forget. On the third evening, as darkness settled, Sakura heard a soft, hesitant tapping at the door. Then, a whispered voice broke the silence. "Sakura, can you hear me?" Hope flickered in her chest. Sakura moved to the door, pressing her face close to the rough wooden frame. "I'm here," she whispered back, her voice raspy from disuse. "I cannot stay long," Yuki said, her voice a quiet rush. "The mistress is strict, but I wanted you to know. You are not forgotten." Then, through the small gap under the door, Yuki slid a small cloth bundle. Sakura's trembling fingers reached for it. Inside was extra rice, wrapped carefully, still warm. It was a small kindness, a simple gesture, but it meant the world. It was proof that someone still cared, that she hadn't completely disappeared. "Thank you," Sakura whispered, hot tears finally spilling from her eyes, tracing paths down her cheeks. "Be strong," Yuki urged from the other side. "You are not alone. I will come when I can." Then she was gone, her footsteps fading softly down the long corridor, leaving Sakura once again in silence. Sakura unwrapped the rice and ate it slowly, savoring each grain. It was more than just food. It was hope. It was the first kindness she had been shown in days, a tiny light in the overwhelming darkness, and for now, it was enough. The weeks passed slowly in that quiet room. Sakura had nothing to do but think and wait. She thought about her childhood in the farming village. She could barely remember her mother's face now. She thought about the day her family sent her away. They had been desperate. The harvest had failed, and they believed she would have opportunities in the city. They didn't know the truth of where she would end up. And now, she thought about the child inside her. She tried not to feel too much, to maintain some emotional distance. But as the baby grew stronger, it became harder. The child moved. She could feel it turning and shifting inside her. At night, when the house was quiet, she would place her hand on her belly and feel the small movements beneath her palm. A gentle push, a tiny shift, a life that knew nothing of the complicated world outside. She wondered if it was a boy or a girl. She wondered what would happen after the birth. The mistress had said arrangements would be made, but that could mean so many things. Perhaps the child would be given to a temple, or to a family that wanted a child. Perhaps two relatives in the countryside who needed help on their farms. She tried to hope for the best outcome. Sakura tried not to become too attached. Attachment was dangerous. It would only make the inevitable separation harder. But the body does not always obey the mind. The heart does not follow logic. And as the months passed, she felt something growing inside her that was more than just the physical presence of the baby. She felt a connection, a quiet bond, a hope that this child would have the opportunities she never had. One night, she spoke to the baby for the first time. She whispered into the darkness, "I don't know what will happen to you. I don't know where you will go, but I hope you will be safe. I hope you will be cared for. I hope you will have a good life." Her voice was soft and sad. "I am sorry I cannot be the one to raise you, but perhaps that is for the best. Perhaps you will have better chances without me." She continued to feel the gentle movements, a silent conversation in the dark, a bond between a mother and a child with an unknown future. As winter drew near, the room grew cold, and in the 7th month of her pregnancy, Sakura fell ill. She had only thin blankets to shield her from the chill. Years of hard work and meager food had taken their toll, leaving her body weak. A fever set in, and a deep cold settled in her bones. She was exhausted, her body straining under the double burden of pregnancy and illness. For 2 long days, only the usual meal trays were left at her door. No one came to check on her. On the 3rd day, her friend Yuki, worried by her absence, managed to approach Sakura's room. Hearing her friend's faint, weak voice through the door, a knot of concern tightened in Yuki's stomach. She went straight to the mistress. "Sakura is ill," Yuki said, choosing her words with care. "If her condition gets worse, it could affect her ability to return to work later. Perhaps I could provide some basic care." The mistress, ever practical, knew an unhealthy worker was a useless one. She granted Yuki permission to enter the room once a day to offer simple help. When Yuki finally opened the door and saw her friend, pale and gaunt, her heart ached. "Oh, Sakura," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She immediately brought warm tea to soothe Sakura's throat and an extra blanket to chase away the shivers. She sat with her friend, offering the quiet comfort of her presence. Slowly, over the next week, Sakura's condition began to improve. The fever broke, and though she was still very tired, a little of her strength returned. The experience had been terrifying. It made her realize just how vulnerable she was, completely dependent on others for even the most basic needs. Besides Yuki, who had so little influence, there was no one to speak for her. One day, as Yuki visited, Sakura looked at her with pleading eyes. "Yuki," she began, her voice still a bit weak, "when the baby comes, will you try to find out what happens to it? Will you try to learn where it goes?" Yuki's eyes filled with sympathy. "I will try," she answered honestly. "But you know I have little say in these things. The mistress makes all the decisions." Sakura nodded, understanding. "I know, but if you can learn anything at all, please tell me." Yuki squeezed her hand, a silent promise passing between them. "I promise I will do everything I can." The 8th month had arrived, and with it, the undeniable weight of new life. Sakura's belly was large now, a constant, heavy presence that made every movement a deliberate effort. Her back ached, a dull, persistent throb that never quite went away. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford, arriving only in short, fleeting intervals. The baby's kicks or her own discomfort would jolt her awake, leaving her exhausted not just in body, but in spirit. Months of isolation had slowly chipped away at her resilience. The future was a vast, uncertain expanse, and the weight of it pressed down on her. She found herself lost in a cycle of questions. What would it be like when the baby was born? Would they even let her see the child? And if they did, would that make things easier or infinitely harder? Part of her longed to see the baby's face, to count its fingers and toes, to know it was healthy, to hold that one precious memory. But another, more fearful part, whispered that it might be better to never see the child at all. Perhaps a clean break would lessen the pain of separation. But deep down, in the quietest corners of her heart, she knew the truth. She had to see her baby. Just once, just for a fleeting moment. She needed to look at the child she had carried for so long, to confirm that this journey was real, that this tiny person was whole, that it had a chance at life, even if her heart shattered in the process, even if the memory haunted her forever. She craved that single moment of connection before they were torn apart. One night, as she lay on the futon, a strange sensation pulled her from a light doze, a tightening in her belly, sharp and unfamiliar. It passed as quickly as it came, and she tried to dismiss it. An hour later, it returned. This was different from the baby's usual tumbles. It was more intense, more focused. A cold wave of realization washed over her. This was labor. It was starting, but it was too early. She was only 8 months along. The baby was coming, ready or not. The sensations grew stronger, closer together. She fought to stay calm, to breathe through the rising tide of anxiety. Pushing herself up, she shuffled to the door and called out into the silent house. "Please, I need help. The baby is coming." Her voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the stillness of the night. She tried again, louder this time, desperation sharpening her tone. "Please, someone, help." At last, the faint sound of footsteps approached from the other side of the door. Help was coming, but Sakura knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the hardest part was just beginning. The footsteps grew louder, and then the door slid open. It was Yume, one of the older attendants, who had served in the house for as long as anyone could remember. Her eyes fell on Sakura, and in an instant, she grasped the situation. "The baby is coming," she said, her voice steady and calm. Without another moment's hesitation, she turned and called down the corridor, "Bring hot water and clean cloths. Quickly." In a matter of minutes, the small, quiet room was filled with purposeful activity. Yuki appeared at the doorway, her face etched with worry. "I heard," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Can I stay with her?" The mistress of the house, awakened by the commotion, stood silently in the hallway, her expression unreadable. After a long moment of consideration, she gave a slight nod. "You may stay. Ensure everything is handled properly." She didn't step inside. Her only concern was that the situation was managed efficiently, and that Sakura would be ready to return to her duties as soon as possible. Yuki knelt down beside Sakura, taking her hand in a firm, reassuring grip. "I am here," she whispered softly. "You are not alone." As another wave of pain washed over her, Sakura squeezed Yuki's hand tightly. The agony was immense, but she bit back a cry. Years of training had ingrained in her the need for silence, to never disturb others, to bear her suffering quietly and in solitude. You moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had seen this all before. In a place like Yoshiwara, a birth was not an unprecedented event, but it was always a secret, a quiet affair, hidden from the prying eyes of the outside world. She expertly prepared the space, arranging the cloths and speaking to Sakura in a low, soothing tone. "Breathe through the pain," she instructed. "Don't fight it. Your body knows what to do." The hours stretched on, long and arduous. Sakura was young, and this was her first child. Years of meager food and relentless work had left her frail. Yet, slowly, with a resilience she didn't know she possessed, the baby continued its journey into the world. Just as the first pale light of dawn began to seep through the high window, Sakura felt a final, overwhelming pressure, and then a sudden release. A new sound filled the room, the thin, piercing cry of a newborn baby, announcing its arrival to the quiet, waking house. Yume wrapped the baby quickly in a clean cloth. Sakura tried to see, tried to lift her head, but she was exhausted. "Sit," she whispered. "A girl?" Yume said quietly. "A healthy baby girl." She cleaned the infant with efficient movements, checking to make sure everything was as it should be. The baby cried strongly, her tiny fists waving in the air. A good sign. She had strong lungs and a will to live. Sakura's eyes filled with tears. A daughter. She had a daughter. For 9 months she had wondered, and now she knew. "Kinai?" She started to ask, but her voice broke. Yuki looked at Yume. "Please," Yuki said softly. "Just for a moment. Let her hold the baby. Just once." Yume hesitated. The mistress had given clear instructions. The baby was to be taken away immediately. No attachment was to be formed. But Yume was not a cruel woman. She had lived a long life and had seen much suffering. She looked at Sakura's young face, at the desperate hope in her eyes, and she made a decision. "1 minute," she said quietly. "No more." She wrapped the baby securely and placed her in Sakura's arms. "1 minute, and then I must take her." Sakura looked down at her daughter's face for the first time. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused newborn eyes. She was small, but perfectly formed. Tiny fingers, tiny toes, a small nose, dark hair, still damp from birth. She was beautiful, more beautiful than anything Sakura had ever seen in her entire life. "Hello, little one," Sakura whispered. Her tears fell onto the cloth wrapped around the baby. "I am your mother. I will probably never see you again after this moment, but I want you to know that you are loved. You are wanted. You are precious." She pressed her lips gently to the baby's forehead. "Be strong. Be free. Have the life I could not have." Her voice broke completely. "Please, be happy." The minute passed far too quickly, feeling like just a few seconds had gone by. Yume reached for the baby, her touch gentle but firm. I must take her now, she said. Sakura's arms tightened instinctively around the small bundle. Every part of her screamed to hold on, to never let go, to protect this tiny life she had carried for 8 months. But she knew there was no choice. She had no power here, no rights, no say in what happened next. Slowly, painfully, she loosened her arms. Yume lifted the baby away. The infant began to cry again, as if sensing the separation. The sound cut through Sakura's heart like a sharp blade. She turned her face to the wall and wept silently. Her friend Yuki stayed beside her, one hand on her shoulder, unable to find any words that could possibly help in this devastating moment. Yume carried the baby out of the room, where the mistress was waiting in the hallway. "The child is healthy?" she asked. "Yes," Yume confirmed. "A girl, strong and healthy." The mistress nodded. "Good. I have already made arrangements. A family in the countryside is willing to take her. They lost their own infant daughter last year and had been hoping for another child. Their father is a merchant. They can provide for her." Yoon felt a small sense of relief at this news. It could have been much worse. The baby would have a home, a family, a chance at a decent life. "When will they come for her?" Yoon asked. "Tomorrow morning," the mistress replied. "Until then, you will care for the child. Feed her with rice water and goat's milk. Keep her quiet. I do not want the customers disturbed." She glanced toward the room where Sakura lay, and the mother is not to see the child again. "Am I clear?" "Yes, mistress," Yume said quietly. She carried the baby to a small supply room. There, she prepared a soft nest of blankets and laid the infant down with care. The baby had fallen asleep, exhausted from the trauma of her birth. Yume sat beside her, gently rocking the makeshift cradle. "You are a lucky one," she whispered to the sleeping child. "You will leave this place. You will never know what it was like for your mother. Perhaps that is a blessing." In the days that followed, Sakura's body began to mend, but her heart remained fractured. The one question that echoed in her every waking moment was about her baby. Where was she? Was she well? Had they taken her away yet? Every inquiry was met with a wall of silence. Yuki, her loyal friend, tried desperately to find answers, but the mistress had issued a strict order. No one was to speak of the child to Sakura. "It's for the best," the mistress declared with chilling indifference. "The sooner she forgets, the sooner she can get back to her duties." But forgetting was impossible. Forgetting would be a betrayal. Every time Sakura closed her eyes, she saw her daughter's tiny, perfect face. She could still feel the phantom weight of her in her arms, hear the faint memory of her cry. The memory wasn't just in her mind, it was etched into her very soul. She had held her child for only a single, fleeting minute, but that 1 minute had irrevocably changed the course of her life. It was a minute of pure, unconditional love that now felt like an eternity of loss. 2 agonizing weeks crawled by. Then, one evening, a breakthrough. Yuki, while going about her duties, overheard a hushed conversation between Yume and another attendant. Her ears perked, and she listened intently. The baby had been taken by the merchant family. They lived in a town 3 days' journey from Edo. They were said to be overjoyed, having received a healthy infant to call their own. They had even given her a name, Hana, which meant flower. Their intention was clear: they would raise her as their own, her true origins forever buried like a secret. That night, under the cloak of darkness, Yuki slipped into Sakura's room. She knelt by her side and whispered the news she had gathered. "Your daughter is safe," she began, her voice barely audible. "She's with a good family, a merchant and his wife, who lost their own child and longed for another. They will love her," Yuki assured her. "They will cherish her. She'll have everything you ever wanted for her food, a warm home, opportunities. She'll never know the hardships of this place. A profound sense of relief washed over Sakura, followed by a fresh wave of tears. This was the best she could have ever dared to hope for. Her daughter would have a real family, a real home, a life filled with promise. She would never be sold, never be trapped, never know the gnawing pangs of hunger or the cold grip of fear. "What is her name?" Sakura asked, her voice trembling. "They named her Hana," Yuki replied softly. Sakura repeated the name, letting it roll off her tongue like a prayer. "Hana, flower. It's a beautiful name." And in that moment, a single, beautiful flower began to bloom in the barren landscape of her heart. Thank you for listening. 3 weeks after giving birth, the mistress entered Sakura's room. Her voice was cold, without emotion. "You have recovered sufficiently," she said. "You will return to your duties tomorrow evening. I have already informed the regular customers that you are available again. Your absence has cost this house significantly. You will work without rest until the debt is repaid." Sakura bowed her head, her heart heavy, but her spirit unsurprised. She had known this day would come. In her world, there had never been any other possibility. "Yes, mistress," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. That night, her friend Yuki helped to prepare. They heated water for washing, the steam filling the small room. They gently applied the thick white makeup, erasing the mother and revealing the courtesan. They painstakingly arranged her hair into an elaborate, heavy style, pinning it with ornaments that felt like a cage. Finally, they wrapped her in layers of heavy silk kimono, each one a reminder of the life she was being forced back into. The transformation took hours. When it was finished, Sakura gazed into the polished mirror. The woman looking back at her was a ghost from her past. The same painted face, the same elaborate costume, the same practiced, empty smile. But on the inside, everything had changed. She was not the same person. She was a mother who had held her child for a single, precious minute before losing her forever. As they sat together in the final moments of quiet, before the noise and chaos of the evening began, Sakura turned to Yuki. "How do you bear it?" she asked, her voice cracking. "How do you continue, day after day, in this life?" Yuki was silent for a long moment, her eyes reflecting a deep, shared sorrow. "You find small reasons?" she finally said. "You find moments of kindness, however fleeting. You hold on to the hope that someday, somehow, things will be different. And you remember that you are stronger than you ever knew." Sakura nodded slowly, the words sinking in. She thought of her daughter, Hana. She pictured her living somewhere far away, with a family that loved her, growing up free. That one thought, that one image, would have to be enough. It would have to sustain her through the long nights and empty days ahead. She stood, smoothing the fine silk of her kimono. "I am ready," she said, her voice a little stronger now. Yuki squeezed her hand one last time, a silent gesture of solidarity. And with that, Sakura walked out of the room and back into the floating world. She carried her secret grief deep within her, a private sorrow no one could see. But she also carried a small, defiant flame of hope that her daughter would have the life she never could. Months slipped into years, and Sakura's life in Yoshiwara settled into a somber rhythm. She wasn't the same woman anymore. The other courtesans saw it a new quietness, a distance that had never been there before. She went about her duties with a quiet efficiency, but a deep, lingering sadness never left her eyes. In the dead of night, alone with her thoughts, her mind would always drift to Hana. She'd wonder how tall her daughter had grown, what her voice sounded like, and most of all, if she was happy. Sakura soon realized she wasn't the only mother in Yoshiwara. Over time, she learned to spot the subtle signs in the other women. The way a young courtesan would suddenly fall ill in the mornings, or how another would tie her obi just so, to conceal a gentle curve. She saw the same fear in their eyes that she once felt the moment they understood their fate. A silent, unspoken bond formed between them, a shared secret in a world that demanded silence. One evening, a new girl named Kiku arrived. She was only 14, sent from a faraway village, completely terrified and bewildered. She had no idea what this place truly was, or what would be asked of her. In Kiku's wide, innocent eyes, Sakura saw a reflection of her younger self, an innocence on the verge of being shattered. A powerful urge to protect her took hold. So, Sakura began to watch over Kiku from a distance. She offered small, quiet kindnesses, a little extra food, a soft word of encouragement, practical tips on how to survive the intricate politics of the house. Kiku, grateful for any warmth, started following Sakura around like a devoted younger sister. "Why are you so kind to me?" she asked one day, her voice full of wonder. Sakura offered a sad, gentle smile. "Because someone should be," she replied simply. The years continued their relentless march. Sakura reached her mid-20s, an age considered old for a courtesan in Yoshiwara, where youth was the most prized commodity. The mistress of the house began to give her different tasks. Less time was spent with clients, and more time was dedicated to managing the younger women, teaching them the arts of their trade, supervising the household chores. It was a strange, unexpected relief, a small mercy in a life that had offered so few. She had found a new, albeit bittersweet, purpose. One winter evening, as Sakura walked through the quiet corridors, she heard a sound she knew all too well. It was the muffled, desperate sobbing of a woman trying not to be heard, coming from a small back room. She knocked gently on the door. "May I come in?" she asked. After a brief pause, a quiet voice replied, "Yes." Inside, she found Kiku, now 17, and 3 years into her time there, sitting on the floor with her face buried in her hands. Sakura knelt beside her. "What is wrong?" she asked softly, though she already had a heartbreaking suspicion. Kiku looked up, her eyes wide with terror. "I think I am pregnant," she whispered. "I am not certain, but I think so. What will happen to me?" Sakura's heart ached for this girl, who had become like a younger sister to her. She knew exactly what would happen. It was the same fate that had befallen her, and so many others before them. But in this moment, Kiku needed comfort, not more fear. "First, we must be certain," Sakura said, her voice steady and calm. "How late are you?" Kiku confessed it had been 2 months, maybe even more. "You have choices," Sakura explained carefully. "You can tell the mistress now. If you do, she will give you herbs to drink. It will be painful, but it will be quick. She'll let the weight of those words settle before continuing. Or you can hide it for as long as you can. That is what I did. Either way, it will be difficult, but you do not have to face this alone. I will help you, whatever you decide." Kiku's quiet sobs grew louder. "I do not want to lose it," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Is that foolish? I know I cannot keep the baby. I know it will be taken away. But the thought of ending it now..." Her words trailed off, lost in her grief. Sakura understood with a depth of pain that was all too personal. She wrapped her arm round the younger woman, holding her close. "It is not foolish," she said softly, her voice a gentle reassurance. "It is human, and I will help you hide it for as long as possible." For months, Sakura became Kiku's silent guardian, a mirror of the help she had once received from Yuki. She taught her the art of deception, how to bind her growing belly to keep it flat, how to select robes with flowing lines and intricate patterns to camouflage her changing shape. Sakura coached her on feigning minor illnesses, a cough here, a headache there, just enough to be excused from demanding duties without raising suspicion. Every day was a gamble. Discovery would mean punishment for them both, a harsh reality they both understood. But for Sakura, the risk was worth it. This was her chance, a small act of rebellion, to support another woman trapped in the same impossible web. Inevitably, the secret unraveled. The mistress's rage was a cold fire, but it burned hottest for Sakura. "You, of all people," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You knew the rules. You knew the price." Sakura's few earned privileges vanished overnight. She was demoted to the lowest ranks, plunged into the grueling world of menial labor, endless scrubbing, mountains of laundry, and the sweltering heat of the kitchens. It was a punishment designed to break her spirit, but Sakura accepted it without a word of protest. She had made her choice with open eyes and would make it again. Kiku was locked away, confined to a small, isolated room, just as Sakura had been all those years ago. A direct order forbade Sakura from seeing or even speaking to her. Yet, in the deep silence of the night, Sakura would find herself drawn to that room. She would press her lips close to the wooden door and whisper words of encouragement into the darkness. "Be strong. You are not alone." The night Kiku's labor began, Sakura was scrubbing pots in the kitchen. The sounds of the house changed, carrying the raw primal cries of childbirth through the halls. Then, after what felt like an eternity, a new sound pierced the night, the thin, fragile wail of a newborn baby. A boy. Sakura closed her eyes, her hands still in the greasy water, and sent a silent prayer into the universe. A prayer for mother and child to survive. A prayer for the baby to find a loving home, far from this place. A prayer that someday, somehow, this relentless cycle of sorrow would finally be broken. Gossip traveled in whispers, and soon Sakura learned the fate of Kiku's son. He had been taken to a temple, where the monks would find him a new family. Kiku, though heartbroken, had no power to resist. Within weeks, she was back at her duties, her profound grief masked by a painted smile and a silken kimono. Life in Yoshiwara, unchanging and unforgiving, simply moved on, swallowing their pain as if it were nothing. Thanks for watching. Years ticked by, and Sakura saw her 30th birthday. In Yoshiwara, that was an age few women in her profession reached with their value intact. The beauty she had so carefully preserved was starting to fade. The lead-based makeup had poisoned her skin, leaving it dull and damaged. Years of meager meals had weakened her body. She was no longer a sought-after courtesan. One day, the mistress of the house called her in and gave her a new role. House attendant. She would now teach and supervise the younger girls, the new blossoms of Yoshiwara. In a strange, unexpected way, this change felt like freedom. She no longer had to entertain men, to feign desire, to sell pieces of herself night after night. Her new duties were practical, honest work. She taught the young apprentices how to artfully arrange their hair, how to tie the intricate knots of their robes, and how to move with a grace that seemed to float on air. But she taught them more than that. In quiet moments, she showed them small acts of kindness, how to support one another in a place designed to make them rivals, and how to hold on to their humanity when everything tried to strip it away. One bright spring morning, as Sakura was sweeping the front entrance, she saw a young woman walking past the gates. She was about 19 or 20, dressed in fine silks, accompanied by an older woman who looked to be her mother. They were clearly a merchant's family, comfortable, respectable, and most importantly, free. The young woman laughed at something her mother said, a sound pure and light. Sakura's breath caught in her throat. There was something in the way the girl held her head, the shape of her face, a familiar grace in her movement. It was impossible, she told herself. It couldn't be, and yet Hana would be that age now, 19. The merchant family who had adopted her lived not far from the city. Could it be? Sakura stood frozen, her broom forgotten, watching until the young woman and her mother vanished into the bustling crowd. She knew she would never be certain. There was no way to find out if that was truly her daughter. But in that fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine, to hope. She let herself believe that the laughing young woman was Hana, happy, loved, and living the free life Sakura had only ever dreamed of for her. And that thought, that fragile, beautiful possibility, was enough. It was everything. Thank you for watching. As the sun set over Yoshiwara that evening, Sakura stood by the high walls, looking out at the city beyond. She thought about all the women who had lived behind these walls over the decades, the mothers who had carried children in secret, the babies who had been born and then taken away, the grief that was swallowed and hidden, the love that existed in impossible circumstances. Their stories were never recorded in history books. Their names were forgotten. The children they bore never knew their mothers had even existed. And yet, they were real. They had loved. They had suffered. They had made impossible choices with courage and grace. They had survived, and their strength, though invisible, truly mattered. Sakura thought of Yuki, who had shown her kindness when she needed it most. Yuki had died a few years ago, worn out by a life of hardship. But her memory lived on in every act of compassion Sakura showed to the younger women. She remembered Yume, the attendant, who had allowed her to hold her baby for just one precious minute. That single minute had sustained Sakura through 19 years of life that followed. 1 minute of holding her daughter had given her a reason to keep going. She thought of Kiku and the other young women who had become pregnant in this place. Each one facing the same impossible situation, each one showing remarkable strength. They weren't just victims. They were women who made choices within circumstances they couldn't control. They found ways to care for each other, to protect each other, to preserve their humanity in a place designed to take it away. And she thought of Hana, her daughter. Whether the young woman she'd seen was truly Hana or not didn't really matter. Somewhere, her daughter existed, 19 years old now, perhaps married, perhaps with children of her own, living a free life that had been Sakura's gift to her, the only gift she could give, and it was enough. The floating world of Yoshiwara continued for many more years, but eventually, times changed. The district was closed, the walls came down, the women were released, though many had nowhere to go. The buildings were torn down, and the stories of what happened there became whispers, legends, half-forgotten memories. But the mothers were real, their babies were real, their love was real, and though history may have forgotten their names, their courage deserves to be remembered. They survived in a world that gave them no choices. They found ways to love in a place that forbade it. They remained human in a system that tried to make them property, and in that there is something profound, something worth honoring. Their stories are hidden threads that strengthen the great tapestry of human experience. Thank you for listening and for remembering.